Let's see. Welcome back. My name is Michael Neal. I am a senior fellow here at the Urban Institute in our Housing Finance Policy Center. Obviously, I want to extend my gratitude to the Health Policy Center, to P4A, to all of the people who have generously funded what I think has been a very informative and, at least for me, a very exciting conversation. I don't know about you, but I have been very excited. Not just myself, but everyone on this panel, have the great task, I think, of not just lifting up, kind of bringing it home, so to speak, but also really lifting up a deeper conversation into how policy can use the tools of research in their everyday responsibilities. And so we're going to dive a little deeper into some of that aspect of the conversation. I'm joined here by Colleen Green, who is the director of DC Department of Housing and Community Development. Sitting to the left of her is Helen McIlvaine, who is the Director of Housing for the City of Alexandria. Sitting to the left of her is Ingris Moran, lead organizer for Tenants and Workers United. And then rounding it out with Angie Rogers, who is the Deputy Chief Administrative Officer for Economic Development in Prince George's County. I will say that the panels have successively been getting larger, and we're going to have a lot of intellectual conversation in this particular panel. But let me just start off here, and start off with kind of a question. And as part of this question, certainly feel free to talk even more kind of about the work that you do, really to contextualize kind of the environment in which you're in as you think about uses for research. So that question is really around, what housing programs, policies are most important in the communities that you serve. And I guess this is two-pronged, so let me go a little bit slower. What housing programs or policies are most important in your communities? And then kind of a part two, how well are they working? What are some of the biggest challenges you're encountering? Colleen, let's start with you.
Well, that's not an easy question. I mean, which ones are more important? I don't really know how to pick. So, we do housing programs that are on the single family side as well as the multifamily side, always towards an eye of preservation and producing more affordable housing. I think that one of our more popular programs is the Home Purchase Assistance Program, which is a down payment program. There's a lot of information around that on that program and what's been done over time and changes that have been made in the last 2 years and the effect on home purchase and that. So that's one. We also have our inclusionary zoning program that was started. I think the legislation on that came out maybe 2007, 2008, and it's been able to produce affordable housing in larger developments that are really intended for market rate, but then you have a portion that has to be affordable. So we're always in the game there. And then, you have the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. And I think that is a preservation tool that is important. But I think at one point, it was a first right to purchase program, and now it's sort of the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. And there's a lot of, I think that's something that needs to be looked at in terms of policy. That's how it's affecting the market currently, and sort of what it's been doing to investments, right? Had one intention, is kind of gone in a different direction than was originally intended. And so those are, sort of the things that come to mind right now.
And, what I hear there is, a comprehensive toolkit, kind of echoing Solomon's original comments around some of the demand side policies like HPAP, DPA, but then supply side.
Right.
But not just in supply, being nuanced about new supply around IZ and that sort of thing, but
Right.
also existing supply around TOPA.
Right.
And that being a comprehensive toolkit toward bringing out affordable housing.
Yes.
Very, very, very interesting. Helen, invite you to join this conversation.
Sure. Thank you very much. And you mentioned earlier, maybe say a little bit about what we do. So I run a very small office, but we have three things that we do. So I work in affordable housing development, kind of to return to Solomon's comments about, just supply by itself is probably one of the most important things that we do to ensure that people in Alexandria have housing choices at a variety of price points, but especially being very focused always on those who are at the 30, 40, 50%. So that's something that since our housing master plan, we've been really very laser focused on that. And we're one of the jurisdictions that have endorsed our target for COGS regional housing initiative. So before 2030, although we're a relatively small jurisdiction, providing 4,250 new affordable and workforce units. So I work on the development and finance side with nonprofits and mission-based groups with our local housing authority, and also with private developers who are willing to do that and work with us to provide housing affordability. But a very wonderful part of my job is being deeply involved in citywide planning processes. And I think one of the most important things that we've done over the last decade or longer is to work hard to make sure that we have strategies in place so that those who are going to be impacted by our decisions, by our planning processes, by our contributions, by all of our policies are also at the table and bring their lived experience and their perspectives and their needs and help amplify that to the community so that the community and the elected leaders really get why housing affordability is a priority. It's going to cost a lot of money. It might mean that we accept greater density, but it's critical to that work.
I mean, Helen, one of the things that you've pointed out, and I guess I'm pushing on this a little bit more, is, again, all of the different actors that are at play, that, it's not just kind of the market rate developers, but you're bringing in the philanthropic side and other key pieces in order to bring about the supply that you're looking for.
Right, and the stakeholders are also varied. And sometimes the group, when we're, I should say, thank you for doing this. We're a work in progress, so I'm here learning as much as I can from everybody. But I think what we're, also learning is that we have to be much more creative to, be culturally competent, to reach all of our neighbors, and to make sure that we're fostering the kinds of meetings where people are listening to one another, rather than, you go to one civic association and you hear people who all agree with one another, talk about that, and instead, getting to sit next to and work with someone else who comes from a different background, who has different needs. So.
No, excellent. And I think that's actually a really great segue, Ingrid, thinking about, I think you have a very important voice on this panel in terms of, policymakers on one side of that table, but certainly other stakeholders, community activists kind of on the other side of that table, but also potentially in partnership with an opportunity to influence in terms of potential outcomes. So kind of really want to give you a chance to raise up your thoughts here.
Sure. So again, I'm Ingrid Moran. I'm a lead community organizer at Tenants and Workers United. So we're based out in Northern Virginia, Alexandria, Virginia, and we particularly work with working class families, particularly Black, Brown, immigrant in Alexandria City, South Fairfax, and Prince William County. And so most of the community members we do work with are tenants, and tenants who are also owners of their mobile homes. And so recognizing that we are in Virginia, it does make things more difficult because of a lot of the lack of state policies. And so our organization is how can we support and empower the working class families who are at risk of being displaced in communities that they have been so stable from. And so how do we prevent displacement? How do we agitate and hold accountable our elected officials? And so we're really focusing not just specifically housing programs, but programs that essentially work to keep our families stabilized and preserve, and also find a vision to really have our families live in safe and dignified, affordable housing. And what affordable means to our community is deeply committed affordable housing for families who earn 40% of the AMI. So most of the families we work with earn less than $50,000 a year. And so we're really working with the construction workers, our families who work in service jobs. And so the ones that aren't normally part of the decision-making process. And so how do we as an organization become a resource to our communities, whether it's working with Helen from the city of Alexandria, whether it's agitating city council, or whether it's, building connections and relationship with nonprofit developers, because we hear that they're going to build across from our community. So how do we start creating those connections and ensure that our families are not just being heard, but their needs are taken into actions? And so I would say the question about what kind of programs we need programs that will stabilize our families and preserve our families and prevent displacement, but also how do we build deeply committed affordable units that will not be 5 or 10 units that we will just have when the need is so much larger than that.
And one of the things that I heard from what you said is, we certainly talk a lot about housing and how it can be used as a tool for wealth building, and certainly that's important. We know the figures around racial wealth gaps and income wealth gaps and community wealth gaps, et cetera. But that stability is something that I continue to hear just in your response that I think is equally important in terms of what families are looking for and what they need, particularly if they are historically marginalized or more vulnerable, et cetera, et cetera. Just powerful comments that I think really bring in, Angie, some of the things that you're thinking about and doing as well in Prince George's County. Just want to hear, a little bit more about, what's going on in Maryland.
Sure. As the Deputy CAO for Economic Development, I oversee a cluster of agencies, 4 of which are really focused on housing and community development. I also oversee agencies that focus on business development, corporate expansion, also serve as the liaison to parks and planning. And so part of the beauty of sort of being at the head of a cluster like that is that as I think about sort of what kind of economic development strategy to push for the county, it's been really important to me because affordable housing is sort of where I cut my teeth. It's what I'm always going to return to, even though I have this larger focus now. But how do we sort of marry those so that all of our strategies are feeding each other? We, set a new economic development platform for the also Brooks administration that had this sort of typical economic development policies about bringing in more jobs, increasing the commercial tax base. But one of the things we were really intentional about was that we've got to start to build this comprehensive toolkit, because if we do one without the other, if we sort of bring in a bunch of corporate expansion and we don't pay attention to this other lane, then we'll make the same mistake that lots of communities are sort of, kicking themselves for now, not having focused on this earlier. So I would say the biggest, the most important things that we've put in place, and this is going to sound crazy to some of the other jurisdictions in the room who are much further ahead than Colleen and I were talking in the green room about the focus and intention that DC has had on affordable housing and the amount of resources that they've been putting into it is we're 20 plus years into that. Prince George's is just on the cusp. One of the most important things that we did was to build a housing investment trust fund with a sustainable funding source. And that just happened 3 years ago. And so, but that's been huge for us to create that kind of predictability for partners that we were asking to come in and sort of join us on this quest to create more affordable housing. We also adopted the COG goals as well. And so we needed to provide that predictability. I would say the second big thing for us was a policy that actually had been on the books legally for a while. Our right of first refusal program aimed at preservation. You know, what Prince George's had that isn't as prevalent in the rest of the region was a lot of naturally occurring affordable housing. But a lot of it isn't in very good condition. There wasn't the sort of market forces that encouraged keeping that housing sort of in good quality. And so we, you know, as we saw some neighborhoods in Prince George's County start to sort of experience type of growth that we've seen around the rest of the region. So neighborhoods along the Purple Line, neighborhoods now along our Blue Line corridor, along our Blue Line Metro corridor. These neighborhoods experiencing really prominent growth that the housing's starting to flip. And I remember when I first joined the Alsop Brooks administration, I said to the team over at DHCD, I said, every time I sign off on somebody selling one of these buildings, it feels demoralizing to me. And I want to stop doing that. And so we have to build a program that's going to help us disrupt this market force that we can see it's going on. Like, we know that when we add new transportation options to neighborhoods, when we add new jobs, when we know that these things squeeze markets. And so we've got to respond. And so our right of first refusal policy has been that for us. And I think within maybe like a year and a half of launching the program, we had a quick like 2,400 units like in the pipeline going through our right of first refusal process, which was huge for us. And the bigger thing was that once the owners figured out that we were going to exercise our right to buy these properties and disrupt that market, then they started coming to us and saying, all right, what if we work with you? We'll agree to make some of these units affordable if we can kind of reach a consensus here. We can reach agreement, and we don't have to have the county sort of stepping in. So that's been huge for us.
I mean, you know, one of the things that really kind of sticks out there is really two points. The first one is around, you know, centering affordable housing. That as we think about any challenge that a locale is facing, that we're centering and we're thinking principally about what are the implications in terms of affordable housing, and with that, potentially opportunities to reach across to talk to the workforce people and some of these other parts of the government agency that maybe historically may have been siloed but are needed as part of a comprehensive attempt to bring more affordable housing to the community. And so with that, let me come back to this question about, you know, your sense of how well the policies are working, some of the biggest challenges. Because I think one of the things that hasn't come out is oftentimes how difficult this is. You know, that this is a challenge. You're navigating institutions, you're navigating policies, and, you know, inevitably, you're going to come to pain points that may feel demoralizing at times. I think Angie kind of spoke a little bit about that, but I don't know, we'll come back maybe this way. We started Colleen with you. Maybe we'll come back, Angie, if you want to say a little bit more there, and then come back.
I would say that the most difficult part for us is political will. And this is very different for me going into Prince George's County. I came from the District of Columbia. I know lots of the DC folks in the room. I was in the deputy mayor's office in DC. It was very different coming into a community in the DC metro, where affordable housing was still, to a lot of folks, kind of a dirty term, or something that, they were saying, well, we've got enough of that. And talking about the naturally occurring affordable housing, to which my response was, yes, but the research says that that's disappearing, and that your markets, particularly around your transit stations, are growing and at a really rapid clip, and so you need to try to get in front of this. So I think changing the conversation, and I will say we did this, we introduced the conversation in Prince George's County about affordable housing within the context of a larger economic development strategy. So we sort of couched it to say, here's lots of stuff that you want, right? Like, we know you want these big federal job centers. We know you want sort of all of these things. You can have your dessert, but you got to eat your vegetables too. You got to have this piece of it, or else we're going to get someplace that's unsustainable. But the political will conversation has probably been the most difficult one for us in the county.
Good. Ingrid, I want to, and my apologies, I totally Americanized your name. I'm so sorry. It just is not. It's not coming out the way I want it. Forgive me. But I want to bring you back into this conversation because you have a perspective here in terms of, you might be seeing these challenges, and maybe there's opportunity to provide solution, but maybe also reminding, hey, we need to do more. You talked a lot about that agitation to create positive change, almost like good trouble, so to speak. So I want to hear kind of the perspective you're coming with.
So I think so, as an organization who's really focused locally in local districts and local jurisdictions, make it more difficult because there's only so many things local government is allowed to do, whether it's policy or whether it's funding. And so we know that a lot of things impede us from wanting what we want at the local level because of the lack of policies that are at the state level, for example, rent control, or raising the minimum wage, or policies that hold accountable slumlords that really are abusive to the tenants and not providing safe conditions to our tenants. And so we try to sometimes give the solutions to our city government and say, well, we don't have a locally funded voucher program. Like, can we do this? And so we'll go we'll advocate during the budget process, but then we're like, we support this. For example, we support it, but we're only going to do a study. And so sometimes just the time, how everything takes so much time when our families are surviving, they're struggling, they're day-to-day, paycheck to paycheck, are struggling. They have 2-3 jobs, and so we need immediate responses, immediate policies, immediate programs. And I think the fact that we're part of a system and institution that takes forever to either do a study, and we work very closely with Helen, and Helen is well intended, but at the end of the day, it's part of an institution that takes so much time to at the same time prioritize our communities, right? Because for a long time, everyone, and I think it's also political will. Everyone who runs for city council will support affordable housing, and then we're like, okay, prove it. Support this locally funded voucher program, but yet you only support it for a study, not necessarily putting $500,000, $1 million for this program. And so I think trying to also see what is having more bold leadership within our city council as well. One of the things that I think we've been really proud is the guaranteed income pilot program that the city of Alexandria implemented. We said that, well, it's not a housing program, but it's a program that will stabilize our families. Having an income of $500 for 24 months, it's something that has been very beneficial even for our families, who I think what makes it more difficult is that our families are really mixed income, either are undocumented or very mixed legal status. And so that impedes them from qualifying for other federal subsidy programs or, become a homeowner. And so we are not at that point yet. So what can we do in the meantime to preserve our families? And I think the income pilot program has been really beneficial. But how do we go more and be proactive, right? We know that there's a lot of things at the state level that we aren't able to do because of the Dillon rule, but what can we do as city government in the meantime? And how do we constantly have to push our government to say and to do, not just say, because our city government knows our issues and they know the needs, but how are we going to get there, right? We hear, well, there's going to be a 400 unit committed building, but it's like, yeah, but that's 2-3 years from now. What are you going to do now, right? So it's a lot of, again, agitating is, I think, our key word as an organization. We may not always be welcomed in certain spaces, but I think we always show up and show our people and have our people share their lived experiences and how, the lack of safe and dignified housing impacts the whole community, including our young people, including our elderly. So, yeah.
I mean, Helen, I see you laughing. I think might be a story there that when we get to drinks afterwards, and I hear there's shrimp too, so when we get to all of that, I think I'd like to hear some of these stories.
Well, Ingris and her group is incredibly effective and powerful and has moved city policy. So I will just say that she's being modest and underestimating their impact. But I would say a few summers ago during the pandemic, one of the things we've done is started to work with groups like Tenant and Workers United, who really have, deep, trusted roots in the community. And they've done research about what the housing need is. And that was really the start of our work on our Landria plan. I think preserving, improving, and expanding housing affordability became the main recommendations of that plan. That is the plan, because they were pushing us so hard, but also really helping us to see that, we'd been so stuck on 60% AMI, but that we needed to go a lot deeper. So when we did our housing master plan and set our goal, we said, it's about $50,000 of city money per affordable unit. And now it's about $120,000 per unit. And that's a big jump, and we've moved to getting a portion of the meals tax. And that's, dedicated funding, as Angie said, is a game changer, but there will never be enough money. And the right of first refusal is an awesome tool, because one of the other things that happens in a diverse city like ours is legal status. Landlords are very predatory because they know the reluctance of the community to raise issues and cause trouble. So it's a very tough situation. But I just want to say it's appropriate that Ingris is next to me, being a friend and a little bit of a thorn in my side. But this is what it takes, is people sitting together in meetings, hearing one another's points of view, and learning where policy should go from there.
No, excellent, Colleen. I mean, we've gone around the horn. My apologies. You've sat here patiently.
Oh, I'm fine.
But I definitely want
Just
to
restate the question.
certainly. Is specifically focused on the challenges that you experience pursuing the affordable housing policy goals that you already articulated.
What everyone's articulated here, I can't. They're varied. They are often counter to each other because you have the people that are producers, you have advocates, and I always say sometimes advocates are advocating to advocate and just to advocate, and not really looking at like the policies. Like some of the challenges that we have is policies that are put in place that have unintended consequences today, right? And then, so they have unintended consequences. We have to learn to pivot again. And our policies have to continue to really make sure that we're not only listening to the loudest voice because of a vote or because of someone said something recently, but really what makes sense. And that's sort of what I struggle with a lot, right? There's a popular program here, it's been done a certain way, but we see sort of the unintended consequences down the road. We have a housing ecosystem now that we're talk about preservation. From the COVID pandemic relief, we have people that are just not willing to pay rent anymore. That's the last thing on their mind. When before, the rent was the first thing I grew up learning how to pay, right? Before I even got groceries, it's gonna be a decision between steak or Spam because I had to pay my rent, right? Or my mortgage. And that mindset's kind of gone away. And what happens is there's a pressure now on the resources that we all have to preserve and create affordable housing because the underwriting is going to change, right? So if I was underwriting to 5% vacancy rate, now I've got to underwrite for that economic occupancy issue that we're all seeing, that's 20%. So that means I don't have as much to create or preserve. And somehow that has to be fixed, right? And I think, again, political will to sometimes do the things that are difficult to right size the toolbox for housing. And part of that toolbox is the investment that people that are living in their own spaces make and their contribution. So I think about that. I also, I think Angie used the word disrupt, right?
That's a good word.
Disrupt. How can we use policy, information, political will to disrupt the economic forces that are happening right now, right? Why are we accepting increased construction costs? Because I honestly, okay, there was a window why everything went up. Now, things seem to be flowing. Why are costs continuing to go up? Maybe there's some kind of legislation, law. In this city, if you want to do business in this city, we will only accept a 5% increase per year. Something like, because something has to be done to just stop this run on the economy that just seems so nuts. Interest rates, construction costs, economic occupancy, it's everywhere. It seems like there's no break. So I look at that. But I do feel like the high needs planning areas that we've talked about have been really successful, making sure that, maybe as we listen to Ingress, what needs to happen. I think DC has really been ahead in that sense, to try to make sure we're creating affordable housing in areas where education, health, transportation is already existing, and then putting affordable housing there as well as an opportunity. So that's my answer.
I mean, one of the things that really jumps out at me, I was at an event last week, 2 weeks ago, and one of the people that won an award there was making the point that, housing policy is a physical activity. I think he analogized it to football. And when you hear disruption, you hear agitation, I mean, you get very much this almost violent kind of a process that has to happen in order to achieve some of these goals. And I don't know if I myself need to reflect a little bit more on that, because that's an interesting, there's an interesting set of terms as I'm listening to each of you. But it also brings up, that we don't work clearly, for me as a researcher, and I'm an economist by background, that there's a political economy. It's not just the economics, it's how that is happening within the political context. And I've heard kind of each of you talk about that from your different lens. I'm going to leave it open in terms of who responds first or second, but I want to give each of you a chance to kind of talk about, what are those key influencers that you kind of have to kind of deal with almost as you're pursuing your affordable housing goals?
I'll start. So the influences are, we have our mayor who sets the policy. We have our council. Then we have our stakeholders, and we have our constituents. Sometimes it's the loudest voice, not the rightest voice, and you have to address that. And that also is often challenging. So I want to go to like something as difficult as Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, which it gives people right of first refusal on their own homes to buy before it's bought on the market. That's the simplest way of saying that. And I think the other challenge that you have is affordable housing is difficult for people to understand how it works. So there's a lot, every conversation is an education about, it's not simple, right? And there's so many pressures on it. But if we look at just that one piece, it's a difficult conversation. It's not popular in DC to talk about the fact that should Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act really apply to high-end rental real estate? Like if you are paying $4,000, $5,000 for rent, is that really what it was intended to preserve? Or those are people that because those people have options in my mind. Like they can go anywhere, they can buy a house, they could buy a condo, they have options. Tenant Opportunity Purchase Act was really to preserve affordability so that me, who can't, I'm making 80% of AMI or below, I can afford my unit. I want to preserve that. It's for naturally occurring affordable housing. So what we see happening is in DC, there hasn't really been any new multifamily market permits in the last 6 to 9 months. And I believe that's because of TOPA. Because when I buy a building that is market rate, I still have to go through the TOPA process to wait to trade on it. And I may or may not, there's not certainty in that piece of it. So it's making the market more challenging. So those are really hard conversations that have to happen, but the consequence of not being able to have that is our recurring affordable housing subsidy, the Housing Production Trust Fund, is getting challenged because we get tax revenues to create more affordable housing if those transactions happen and they can trade more easily. Right, so those are some of the things, but that's a very hard conversation in DC because people think that's a tenants' rights issue, and it's not. To me, it's an anti-displacement issue that we should be focusing on and really figuring out a way to move the market. So you have to kind of make hard choices in this economy to make it work.
I'll pipe in and just talk about our industry is an ecosystem just like any ecosystem, and it has to have the right sort of pieces and parts in it to make it work well. And I like to talk about this because I've sat in a bunch of those different roles. I started out in policy and research and advocacy and was in the private sector for a while doing development, and then went into government. Particularly from the advocacy point of view, I think you need this ecosystem that has activists, because those are the people who are going to push us toward the ideals, and we should continue to push toward those ideals. Like the day that we all stop pushing for that, we should hang it up. We need advocates who can come in and sort of negotiate between activists and policymakers who can kind of speak that middle language. And we need that middle language because as a public official, I know that I serve a person who's an elected official, and you can't back her into a corner where she doesn't have a way out and she doesn't have a win, because then we all lose. None of us get what we need. So you have to have this ecosystem that is sort of working in the right way, that sort of marches us from ideals to what is actually feasible and what can be implemented, and even pushes a little bit on that, right? In the green room, we were talking about when COG first released the housing goals, how many communities pushed against that. But COG was saying, we see what's coming. And so we're trying to tell you how to be ready for what's coming. I work in a community that pushed against, those goals and said, well, why are they telling us, what we should be building? We needed that advocacy, activist piece to say, wait a minute, Prince George's, you actually have, you think you don't have an affordable housing problem, but you have one, and it's going to get worse if these dynamics, if these numbers play out. So then you needed the folks who could come in and sort of, negotiate that middle ground to get us to what we have now, which are just the beginnings of, a robust, affordable housing toolkit. But we needed that ecosystem sort of operating in order to get there. And when you don't have it operating, then I think you get what we do see in some communities now, which is sort of voices in echo chambers, kind of screaming at each other, and nobody's listening, nobody's feeling heard, and no really aggressive or robust policies are getting done either.
I agree with that.
Helen, Ingrid, any additional?
I think one of the things we always try to prioritize is have open, candid conversations with our elected officials. We're not just yes, we're going to agitate and disrupt, but we have those open meetings. Like, hey, council person, can you have a community meeting, hear our concerns, and ask those questions about their commitment on where they see things that our community needs. And so I think we really are respectful in that point. And because we want to also be honest with our community. A lot of our community members don't necessarily understand how things function or how policies are implemented, how funding becomes to be. And so we have to really be a resource for our community and let them know, like, hey, the mayor's not just going to pass this bill and implement it in 2 months, right? It's a process, right? And so I think that's something that we try to educate our community, but also let them know that you, as a person who has lived experience, you can hold them accountable. When it's the budget process, we'll help you send that email to them, or let's send 50 emails all at once to our city council members and our city manager, right? And we'll do it bilingual. We'll write it in English and Spanish, so they can also learn that our community is well diverse. And so we try to have those candid conversations and have those open communications and have them come to our space, right? We'll come to their process as well, but have them come to our space and see the reality. And so I think it's difficult when, sometimes as an organization, it gets really frustrating because we want local government to do so much because we hear those families, right? Like, what do you do with our member, who's 86 years old? He's a janitor at the Pentagon. He's still working. And he just got a rent renewal that his rent has increased $500. What do you do? What can we do as an organization, recognizing that there's nothing we can do about it because there's no rent control. There's no, a landlord can do that. And so how do we emphasize our community to not give up, that within the unity of the people there are strength and we can create changes? And so it's really a process where we try to be candid with our elected officials, but also with our community members of what's winnable, right? We're not going to ask for something that we know we may not get it today, but how do we start also giving them the ideas? Or for example, we as an organization helped create a cooperative many years ago, right? How do we start letting our elected officials say that, hey, this is something that we want to go long term, or that would be our end goal, because at the end of the day, nonprofit developers, it's a business, right? They're gonna naturally increase their rent, right? So how do we build something that it's mutual housing for our families? And so I think educating both sides.
That's cool. So let me actually come in here, and we've got some audience questions. I think we have time for probably one question, so I'm going to ask it and give everybody a chance to respond here. And that is, what do you see? What do you see? Let me take a step back here. I feel like in some ways you've described the sausage making, and what do you see in that as the role for research? And let me give an example that might motivate thinking here around, the policy combinations. I think, Colleen, I think you talked about it, led us off with HPAP, TOPA, and new construction. how can research, perhaps using that as a template, how does research inform, the policy combinations needed around affordable housing?
I think policy could really be a tiebreaker in the conversation. Because when you look at evidence-based practices and facts, those were the results of the research you've done and the policy you made. So there's been a number of strike forces and like the Housing Preservation Strike Force, it used data from the Urban Institute around 36,000 units and it came up with the Housing Preservation Fund that DC uses now. And so those are things that can be used to really make sense of where we're going and to really show a roadmap. So, and to be the juggernaut in the conversation that says, where are we? Look at this. Look at the information, and how can we respond to it? And when I talk about, when Angie says, the ecosystem of advocacy, and there's got to be like the facts to me is sort of where we can lean on to elevate the conversation. That's not just emotion, not just what I think, what I'm feeling, but using the actual facts and data to say, okay, I've got all of this information, and now where are we?
I want to I want to know a shout out to Urban. 2 thumbs up, great. That was not me, that was my colleagues, but shout out to Urban and all of that. But Helen, let me give you a chance here.
Sure. Well, I think research is very valuable in helping us decide when there are, constrained resources, whether, at every level. What are the things that are really impactful? What are the things that have worked in communities like ours? And I did want to just challenge Colleen's statement about moving people to neighborhoods of opportunity. I think sometimes our job is to create the communities where people can stay and flourish and do the things that, because that's where people's safety and social nets are. So how do you do all the things and help people flourish in the communities they're in? So.
I think one of the examples our organization did back in 2018 is when we found out that Amazon was going to place their headquarters less than 2 miles away from a predominantly working class neighborhood. We were really concerned, and we were like, well, no one's going to do the research about what can happen to this community, so let's figure it out. Let's work with some professors from a local university and start surveying our community members. And so we surveyed 10% of each apartment complex around Arlandria and Chirilawa, and the results came to be that 90% of the working class families live in overcrowded conditions, have received a rent increase of $200 or more just because of this reaction of Amazon. And so that was a way to us create this report and share it not to just our local officials, but to our state officials about, look, this is this is something that you had an influence to because you gave this amount of funding to this big corporate. So what are you going to do to alleviate, or prevent displacement for this neighborhood? And so I think that this really truly community-led research led to, at the end of the day, what we envision as a potential policy or program. But again, we need the experts who can do the research, because I'm just an expert in my community and door knocking, send me to a new community, I'll go door knock, right? And so that's, our expertise are the people, but sometimes we try to, how do we, use a resource as a researcher or a survey to let it be known what's currently happening, because maybe a census won't tell us that, or it'll be outdated. So I think that could be also like an example. How can we do like, community research more often too?
Research, I think, like the other communities, has been hugely important to us in Prince George's County, and we work with the enterprise policy team on our Housing Opportunities for All study. We worked most recently with Tina and the team at Urban on our rent stabilization study. We work with the HRNA to look at sort of, were particularly hot areas of Prince George's County sort of ripe for inclusionary zoning yet. So the research has been hugely important to us. I think you maybe invited us to take it out of the sausage making a little bit. And so I'm going to do that and think more globally about what I'd like to see, not just for Prince George's County, but for all of us. I would really like to see more research that takes us deeper into the connection between affordable housing and workforce and income. The idea that we are going to affordable housing our way out of the problem that we now live with is, I think that's a dead concept. Even if we went back to, several decades ago, went back to like the level of federal government funding that was like feeding into affordable housing programs, we are still not going to work our way out of this problem because our income inequality problem has grown out of proportion. And so I think there is, like those of us who are working in the affordable housing space tend to think if we just advocate to get back to that 19, like whatever mark, like we'll be doing well. And I don't think that that is going to happen, that we have to start to deal with like the combination of policies that are going to start to work us out of the system. The idea that, we still talk about a minimum wage, sort of in the same way that really similarly we were talking about it decades ago, and we haven't moved beyond that, is I think a stress on our entire system that we've got to deal with that piece too and see that as complementary to what we're doing in the housing space. So I want to see more research that like pushes us to think about that, and not just specific communities, but sort of the global community, right? Because it's global companies that are pushing like our income inequality problem. So I want to, if we're taking it out of the sausage making, I want us to sort of hone in on that and less on thinking we're going to solve this with affordable housing alone.
And immigration policy, because people will
Yeah.
forever be locked into lower paying jobs if they don't have a chance to become documented.
I think that
Amen.
each of you have given all of us a lot of food for thought. I want to thank you. Audience, please thank our panelists. Thank you very much. Colleen, Helen, Ingrid, Angie, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Lisa, who I think is behind me.
Yep,
to
yep.
close it out.
Hi, I'm the only thing between the snacks outside and the rest of your day. So my name's Lisa Dubé. I'm a senior fellow at the Urban Institute. I co-direct the Policies for Action program. The policies, the National Coordinating Center of the Policies for Action program, and the National Coordinating Center sits in the Health Policy Center, but this is a conversation about housing. So I have to first say thank you to my colleagues at Urban in the Housing Finance and the Metropolitan Housing and Community Policy Centers who really helped us with this. We couldn't have done it without you, so thank you. I'm going to start there. But also, I know everybody sitting here on this panel is a very busy person, so I'm really grateful that you took the time to spend the day with this hour with us or so, and your insights are important, and you're doing such good work, and so thank you so much. And then I also want to give a shout out to our researchers who we funded and who have had great ideas to do research and implemented it and are willing to talk about it and how to turn it into action. So with that, I'll just say, and thank you to the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation for funding the Policies for Action program. And refreshments are in the hallway, so enjoy.